Now, the debt levels in so many of these developing countries are going up. Are there countries now that are at the brink of implosion as a consequence of that?
There are several countries that are in deep debt distress. So Zambia has been in the news with the default. We're working very closely with Chad right now and with the IMF on ways to have the creditors permit and agree to a dramatic reduction in the level of debt. Otherwise, the government of the country ends up paying money to creditors that is desperately needed by people for food, for children, for education, for vaccinations, and so on, for the healthcare system. I should note, with our vaccination program, a lot of it is going to be in the form of grants, and the countries will be able to take advantage of that. But even then, you need some resources from the governments in order to help make the health system in the country operate and function. And that can't be done if the cash flow is going to creditors. So we're working with a number of countries to have a deep debt reduction. In Sudan, which has had severe problems over many decades, they're finally beginning to emerge, and I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. We're already putting substantial aid into Sudan, and I'm hopeful that we can put much more aid in 2021, which will help with that crisis situation.
So, I mean, despite the fact that the numbers in terms of coronavirus in sub-Saharan Africa are actually quite low, I mean, the economic outlook that I'm hearing from you are that once again, sub-Saharan Africa is the part of the world that gets crippled the most greatly when we have a major economic crisis.
That's right. There's been a huge inequality, and there's multiple parts of that. One is, even before COVID-19, there was an inequality that was growing in the world of the advanced economies moving up much faster than the poorer economies. In order to narrow inequality, we have to have a situation where poorer countries can grow faster than the advanced economies, and that just wasn't happening. That's a catch-up part of the process. Then when COVID hit, many of the impacts from COVID hit hardest on the poor people around the world. Even poor people in advanced economies were severely hurt because they lost their jobs. But in developing countries, they lost more than their jobs. Often they lost their access to any kind of education and healthcare, for example. And then one other point I would make, the stimulus and the response that was done by the advanced economies tended to make worse the inequality, because the fiscal stimulus often went to existing companies or existing people that had formal sector jobs, and that left out the informal sector economy, and they got hit hard. They were the people that send remittances back to their family in a developing country, for example.
Also hit women a lot harder, yeah.
Women hit children harder, and so a big chunk of the stimulus went to people that were already in the top half of the income scale.
So what's your view of debt forgiveness generally to the poorer countries as a consequence of all this?
There needs to be a dramatic, deep reduction in the amounts of debt on the poorest countries. That's clear. Even prior to COVID, there was an over-indebtedness for many of the countries because of the environment leading into it. The debt had been going up because interest rates were low, and there was a reach for yield among bond investors, for example. So the private sector debt, even of the poorest countries, went up dramatically. And then a second factor was China's giant success with its economy, which also showed up as a big expansion of the debt that they were extending to the developing world. And so that's left the countries with lots of debt and not much ability to repay it. So I think we have to be looking at deep debt reduction, and that's what we were doing in 2020, and I think it will extend into 2021. It's going to take work, and even the legal systems are set up in a way that right now favors the creditors, and I think we need to look for ways to have a more level playing field.
As we look specifically at China, which you mentioned, and the amount of corporate debt on their books, many of the poorest countries are massively indebted to China. Is there a growing sustainability issue of China's economic trajectory in your view?
China showed in 2020 its ability to grow even in a year when the world had massive recessions. One way that they were doing that is expanding the supply from their economy. So they exported a lot more. That buoyed their economy, but it meant that production elsewhere in the world didn't pick up as much. And so I think there are big challenges for China in how to have more of its growth come from internal demand. And that means incomes, for example, of working people in China can go up faster than they have been doing. I think that would be useful both for China and for the world. As far as the debt, I would take note that their currency has been relatively stable. As the world suffered this severe recession, currencies in the major economies were more stable than they had been in the past relative to each other. And that, I think, helps with the recovery and with the new investment that needs to occur.